Well, what do you know? It looks like Jinbei has been confirmed to have Conqueror's Haki, at least according to the anime. If you watch my videos on a consistent basis, you know that there's been several moments that have hinted at this, but episode 1040 definitely seals the deal. See, not only does he activate the intimidation factor in his fight against Husu, but visually the anime depicts his attacks as being coated with King's Haki, and he's also shown to defeat Husu without even touching him. And yes, while you could still argue that Fishman Karate combined with the standard color of arms could probably allow him to do the same thing, the reason why it has to be Conqueror's Haki in this is because of the sound effect it produces. See, when Yamato and Kaido start clashing against each other in episode 1038, we see and hear both of them coating their kanabos with Conqueror's Haki, and them doing that produces a very specific type of Conqueror's Haki screech, and it's that same specific sound that we hear as Jinbei guards and charges up his final attack. Plus, again, he has the whole intimidation factor on as well. Also, Husu uses the term Tekai as synonymous with armament Haki in the episode, which to me feels like the textbook definition of what a retcon looks like in anime. So it looks like we're going to be getting some kind of Mads reunion pretty soon to some extent here, because Caesar is headed to the castle, which is where we last saw Judge. And Vegapunk's design is finally revealed. He looks like Albert Einstein. I'm pretty sure that you already know that one of his biggest contributions to the realm of physics is the equation of E equals mc squared, which is especially fitting in this case because c equals the speed of light. So that kind of matches the trail of breadcrumbs that we've been getting about Vegapunk experimenting with light and using it in his experiments, such as in the Pacifista, or creating lightsabers, or photonic gloves. However, the design of Vegapunk that we get in this chapter does not match the quote-unquote silhouette slash body figure that we saw pre-time skip in Thriller Bark. So it looks like we have another case of the Kaido silhouette from Fishman Island, where Oda changed his mind about what he wanted a character to look like post-silhouette, because now that character just looks more like Ashura Doji than anything else. That being said, Vegapunk's design does match the silhouette that Oda drew a little bit later during Caesar's flashback in Punk Hazard. The opening shot of the chapter shows a bottle of Vegapunk whiskey, which I previously took note of because that's where the clouds that form the Sky Island at the top of Egghead are coming from. And given that we know that pyroblowing is a fundamental component of Sky Islands, and given Lilith's comment in the previous chapter about how the island essentially runs on fire, it kind of gets me to think that maybe that bottle of whiskey is supposed to be functioning as some kind of artificial slash man-made volcano. So it could be that maybe Shaka is about to reveal to the Straw Hats how the Kazuki clan used the eruptions of Mount Fuji back in Wano to create the poneglyphs. And speaking of Wano, this chapter ended up confirming a bit of a connection that I made slash speculation that I had. See, this is why you should subscribe to my channel, because I speculate so much about random that I'm bound to get something right at some point. That's literally the life of a YouTuber. You talk it out of your butt, throw everything out there and see what sticks. So basically, since the entire ancient part of Wano is currently underwater and appears to have been flooded intentionally by the Kazuki clan in the past in order to prevent other people from gaining access to the ancient weapon Pluton, it now makes perfect sense why the scholars of O'Hara had pretty much the exact same idea in regards to protecting their own books. Because they had read about Pluton being hidden in Wano underwater, so they did the same thing to their books. Just keep everything underwater for safekeeping for the time being, and wait for a giant entity to show up in the future to gather it all up and then reveal it to the world when the time is right. By the way, two of the giants fishing the books out of the water appear to be Harjundan and Girth. Their age would match the timeline, because Harjundan is currently 81 years old, and Girth is currently 75 years old. And that's because giants in One Piece can live 3 times as long as a normal human. Now, even though Shaka says that he believes that the story of the Void Century is a story of war and conflict between an alliance of 20 nations versus the advanced Ancient Kingdom, I'm willing to bet that in actuality, the Ancient Kingdom was up against 19 nations instead of 20. And that's because we have enough evidence in the story to suggest that Alabasta was secretly a sympathizer of the people of the Ancient Kingdom and might have been allied with them instead. That's why we heard Dragon say a couple of chapters ago that it would be unforgivable if Sabo was in fact responsible for murdering Cobra. I'm not gonna lie, I thought Usopp's exaggerated cowardly behavior in this chapter was pretty annoying. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I thought he was funny last chapter, but I thought him hitting himself over the head and screaming about how he doesn't want to learn the truth was One Piece opening 22. Over the top. Shaka says that the scholars of O'Hara were demonized and labeled as devils, which once again supports the notion that the people of the Ancient Kingdom were actually the people that created double fruits. And so that gets me wondering, like, what were double fruits called before the world government was established. They must have had another name back then. It's not like the Lunarians were going to be like, yeah, we're going to call them devil fruits because we're devils, we're evil. I also noticed that as Shaka is talking and Robin is reliving her flashback, one of the books that is being thrown out of the Tree of Knowledge is titled Ethnology, which is the branch of anthropology that compares different historical developments as well as cultures to each other. Now, as a therapist, I have to say that I really appreciated Robin mentally reliving a little bit of her flashback in this chapter because it reminded me of a branch of therapy that's called narrative therapy. Now, I'm not an expert on it or anything. It's not even my theoretical orientation, although it's kind of more of a technique, to be honest. But anyway, the premise of it is that our thoughts influence our behaviors, and sometimes our thoughts are heavily influenced by the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So after the client is ready, they can start talking about their past, maybe even write it down, specifically a part of the past that was really difficult for them. So a trauma, right? So you start framing it as it's just one chapter of your life, right? It's just one chapter in a book. It's not the entire book. So out of this chapter, what can we draw from this? Now, you don't discredit or diminish the emotional pain that chapter caused the client, but what you do is you challenge them to look at it another way. So in Robin's case, this would look something like, your mother lived according to her values, and she lived out her values with the goal of wanting you to have a better future because she loved you. And then the incident also ended up motivating other people to do more good. It motivated Dragon to keep standing against evil and establish the Revolutionary Army, which, by the way, you spent 2 years of your life with. It also seems like the incident ended up influencing the course or direction of Vegapunk's research, and you could also argue that the incident ended up changing Aokichi's way of thinking for the better as well. Now, the fact that Dragon already knows Vegapunk by the time they meet in O'Hara pretty much supports the theory/idea that Dragon was actually a part of the Marines, because Garp is pretty strong-willed about wanting his family to join the Marines and stay away from being pirates. Also, Akainu already knows Dragon, and we know that he was a vice admiral during the O'Hara incident. Now, this is actually pure speculation on my part, but I mentioned before in a video that I found it very strange that both Dragon, Akainu, and Nico Olivia, Robin's mom, those three characters are basically the same age, okay? They were 33 years old during the O'Hara incident. That's when Robin's mom died. So if she were alive today, she would be 55 years old, which is exactly how old Dragon and Akainu are today. So I've kind of subscribed to the idea that maybe there was like a secret connection between these three characters. Maybe even feelings were involved at some point, and that created some friction. So with that kind of in mind, I thought it was interesting that the flowers that Dragon brings to O'Hara look like Casablancas, which is exactly the type of flower that would correspond to Robin, according to Oda in an SBS. Also in the chapter, Dragon admits that he knew Professor Clover, so if he knew him, it's more than likely that he knew Olivia as well. This flashback also makes it likely that Dragon was already thinking about the pattern that he would later go on to tattoo on his face, because you see that he has the pattern on a cloth strapped to one of his knees. And again, we've already noted that this is also kind of like the same pattern that Ryuma has on one of his sleeves. Now, I'm actually pretty torn about the reveal that Jaguar D Sol is in fact alive. I'm gonna tell you why that is. I'll give you both sides. To me, Robin's flashback is the best flashback of any member of the crew, period. To the point where I feel even Oda knows this, and that's why he tried to replicate some of the emotional tones and crescendos with Sanji's flashback. But what makes Robin's flashback the most emotionally satisfying to me is that even after the flashback, after experiencing loss, which all of the Straw Hats experience, right? They all experience loss. But after Robin's flashback ends, there's more suffering and more pain to be experienced by her, because she's constantly going to be persecuted, betrayed, and hunted down because of where she comes from. So she learns not to trust anybody because of that, and that conflict doesn't really get resolved until Enies Lobby. And the reason why it takes so long is because, unlike the other Straw Hats, Robin is the only one that literally has no one. Like, at least Brooke had the hope of possibly one day reuniting with Laboon at some point, but when it comes to Robin, she literally had nobody to think about reuniting with, and before meeting the Straw Hats, there was nobody there that would not betray her and abandon her. So it's kind of like she was reliving that pain over and over again as she grew up. And so the reason why I'm torn about Sol being alive is that on one hand, I'm happy for Robin that she will have somebody to reunite with in the future. And as we saw in this chapter, that can offer her some degree of closure and sort of like a, happily ever after sort of ending, a little bit of a cliche ending, but a happy one nonetheless. But on the other hand, I thought it would have been way, way more powerful if by the end we find the One Piece, final war, end of series, she gets to the end and she's like, you know what? Yeah, I don't have anybody to reunite with, but I'm okay. That to me would have been the character development jackpot for Robin, because that ending requires somebody to be stronger and more mature. Because typically in this type of genre/journey, the more uncomfortable something is at the beginning, the more rewarding it is by the end. Now, Vegapunk's head is so large that it doesn't even fit in the panel where he's being introduced. And given the design we get by the end, the most logical conclusion we can draw from this is that Vegapunk split his brain into 6 parts, 7 if you count himself. So he pulled a Voldemort with pieces of his brain. Looks like the climax of the Egghead arc is going to be about Lucci, Kaku, and Stussy hunting for Horcruxes. So every one of the 6 Punk satellites that we've seen holds a bit of his personality. And you can kind of tell that this is the case based on the reasoning he gives for not joining Dragon's group in the past, because he says his group didn't have enough funding, and so without resources he can't build the stuff that he wants to build. So he ended up joining the government instead, because at least then he could secure some funding. But as we learned from Atlas, there's still not enough money nor engineers to be able to mass produce the things that he wants to. So it seems like that sense of frustration within him has stayed the same throughout the years. I like how each of the Straw Hats picks and chooses what to highlight from Shaka's story based on what's more interesting and more important to them. Also, you can see that the area that the Straw Hats are in is surrounded by docks. You have doors with different numbers on them, which is pretty much the same way that Frankie structured the Sunny. Unfortunately, the conversation makes it seem as if Robin really didn't have a whole lot of communication with Dragon during the time skip, because if they had, Dragon should have brought up how it was the O'Hara incident that motivated him to take action and form the Revolutionaries. Then again, it also seems like Sanji didn't know that Ivankov was part of the Revolutionary Army either. So again, not a whole lot of communication going on during the time skip. Also, it seems like Oda is completely set on making the Marines, and by extension the world government, look like clowns again, because Shaka says that the Marines did not understand the value of the books that were inside the giant hole. I love this series from the bottom of my heart. I've dedicated a significant amount of my life to this series. But that makes absolutely no sense. Just think about this, okay? The Marines that were ordered to go to the island, to erase it, to destroy it, right? Because of the research that was being done there, did not see the value of the books that belonged to the researchers that they were called in to destroy. I thought the whole reason behind wanting to destroy the island in the first place was because of the knowledge that it had, because you didn't want that knowledge to get out and to spread. And yet you left a giant pool filled with knowledge for anybody to take. I'm not blaming the archaeologists for throwing the books into the water, because that's literally the best move. That's literally the best they could do. What I am saying, though, is that the Marines and the government, once again, look like incompetent clowns for failing to do their job right. It's interesting to learn that Dragon was kind of a pacifist before all this. It kind of goes along perfectly with Luffy's secret dream being about creating world peace. There's a couple references during the Luffy scene to previous arcs. For one, he calls the ancient giant Robonosuke, which I'm assuming is him remembering how Ryonosuke used to work. And when he tries to pull Vegapunk out of the armor, he makes the connection that it's sort of like a Kinemon scenario where half of him is stuck to something bigger. Now, the material that the giant armor is made out of has to be the same type of material that we saw last week, where the Straw Hats kind of phased through a wall and then it went back into being solid metal. As previously alluded to, Vegapunk's design that we see in this chapter is based off of this picture of Einstein sticking out his tongue at some pesky reporters. So he's another entry into the who has the longest tongue in One Piece competition. Bonney recognizes him immediately, and as previously mentioned, she wants to hurt him, if not kill him. However, I do remember her saying that she would want to ask him some questions first, and then depending on his answers, she would decide what to do. Also, I'm pretty sure the apple lid atop of Vegapunk's head is supposed to represent the apple that inspired Isaac Newton to formulate his theory about gravity. And again, we've had a trail of breadcrumbs throughout the story, sort of hinting at the potential importance of gravity in regards to the actual lore of the story. Now, going back to Saul being alive, a Reddit user by the name of Spiritual Scumlord posted this theory back in October. About a month ago, they say they suspect Saul not being dead due to Aokiji using an attack called Ice Time Capsule, referring of course to the real-life tradition of sealing things inside of a time capsule only to open them up later in the future. Now, if you go back to the scene, Aokiji doesn't just use Ice Time Capsule on Saul, he also uses Ice Time to finish him off. And Ice Time is different from Ice Time Capsule because it makes your body weaker. The way Kuzan explains it is that if he touches you directly with Ice Time and you get frozen, your body can still be saved if you get defrosted carefully, but if you get punched or hit or damaged enough in that state, your body will shatter with the ice. But maybe you can attribute Saul surviving all of that cannon fire back in O'Hara due to him being a giant and just being more resistant than a normal human being. I mean, because he was already tanking some serious shots even before getting frozen, so. That stated, user Spiritual Scumlord goes on to say that Saul is 100% the man marked by fire, as mentioned in chapter 1056. Now that is an idea that I'm 100% on board with and I like very much, because it goes along perfectly with another bit of speculation that I've heavily supported, which is that there has to be a connection between Kid and Vegapunk. So if you remember back in chapter 1056, it's actually Kid and Killer who bring up the idea of being able to find the man with the burned scar. And then after that we get a panel of Robin with a question mark, which now makes more sense. So maybe the reason why Kid and Killer know about the man with the burned scar in the first place is because Vegapunk made a vague comment or let it slip about Saul. This also makes it incredibly likely that the next time we see Kid and Killer, they will already be in Elbaf. The official translation also makes it make sense that Saul is being referred to as the man marked by flames or the man with the burned scar in the first place, because Vegapunk is very vague about Saul. I'm gonna read you what he says to Robin. He is currently in hiding. I could not tell you more, whoever he might be. So maybe for confidentiality reasons, for Vegapunk, like we don't talk about Bruno, right? We don't talk about Saul. We just kind of refer to him vaguely as this mysterious man marked by fire. In other words, this chapter makes it pretty obvious that a significant function of Egghead as an arc is to hype up Elbaf, which is where we're going to next. So in addition to Vegapunk teaching us about Double Fruits very soon, he should also be teaching us something new about giants as well. It goes back to the Caesar Clown flashback when he says that he heard Vegapunk failed again to turn people into giants. I told him you can't just make people big like that unless you use some type of weird magic. Which is interesting because turning into a giant is exactly what Luffy is able to do in his fight against Kaido with Gear 5. So I'm sure that Vegapunk will find Nika's giantification technique very interesting and worth researching. Now, Vegapunk's main body uses the expression quasar in his sentences. In the official, he says re-quasar, which kind of sounds like he's saying Rayquaza. Anyway, in astronomy, a quasar is a celestial object that emits incredible amounts of energy, to the point where some scientists believe that they contain massive black holes. So it's definitely not a coincidence that Law is currently fighting Blackbeard, and I would not be surprised if we get to see Teach and learn more about him in the next chapter. Also, this whole conversation revolving around astronomy also reminds me of the title of supernova, which is essentially the term that you use when a star explodes. Now, in the official translation, Vegapunk actually says that he was warping. Warping how? Like Van Ogre? Yeah, he says, did time-space get twisted somehow while I was warping? Through the giant, I guess, right? He means like warping through the giant? Because now I'm thinking, if he can teleport, is that also why Shanks is able to appear all of a sudden in different parts of the world? Like very quickly? Maybe he's using some ancient kingdom technology that was discovered in Laugh Tale that Roger left behind to him. It looks like we might have just been introduced to a teleportation device in the world of One Piece, which actually would make the pacing of the story go a lot faster. Imagine that you can teleport from island to island. If you could move from one place to another in a short amount of time, it would make the series flow a lot faster. You could also potentially visit the first half of the Grand Line immediately. It's like using Fly in Pokemon. You could also potentially use that technology to warp and travel to the moon, which, given the hints of research that we saw in O'Hara, was probably where the Ancient Kingdom was in the first place, or at least has some connection to it. Finally, a bit of lore that is sort of briefly mentioned in the chapter is a statement from Shaka where he says that timeline matches up with the period in which a certain machine discovered elsewhere was originally produced. A machine discovered elsewhere. And Robin says that the machine was created during the Void Century. So is he talking about an ancient weapon? Is he talking about the ancient weapon that Imu used to erase Lulusia? Or is he talking about the ancient suit of armor that's downstairs? Because we know that that giant belonged to the Ancient Kingdom, right? Maybe it was built as a warrior to fight off the 19 kingdoms. Maybe it's actually a machine and not a warrior. One of the early translations of the chapter I read used the word excavated for the discovery. And so I thought, well, if we're talking about excavation, we know that there was some excavation taking place in the moon because the space pirates were excavating stuff there, and Enel found some ruins of a secret city that could be powered through electricity. Whatever it is, next chapter, it's guaranteed to be big. I mean, we literally just got Vegapunk's design after 16 years of not knowing what he looked like. And yes, I did the math. The chapter where Vegapunk is first mentioned actually came out in 2006. So yeah, that's 16 years. Shout out to those of you reading One Piece back then. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and for all of your support. Take care. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.